Cool. Yeah, so we're going to talk about testing every feature branch with WebdriverIO, sometimes just abbreviated WDIO, Tugboat and Testery. So our goal is we want to run end-to-end tests on every pull request as quickly as possible before merging to a protected branch, for example, master. So I wanted to, before we jump in, talk a little bit about what feature branches are, just in case there are folks on the call who haven't used them before. So typically feature branches are short-lived branches that contain work for individual stories or features. And they're a common practice when using branching techniques like GitFlow or GitHub Flow. So you're in your source control and you have different versions of the code on different branches. And so if I'm a developer and I'm picking up a new chunk of work, I can just create a feature branch, put my stuff on that branch, do some of the things we're going to show what you can do with that. And then ultimately, once it looks good enough, I can merge it. So in GitFlow, you might create a feature / thing I do branch, and then you're pushing it into a development branch when you're done. And then when it's time for the release, you create a release branch, and then you go out into master. GitHub Flow is a simpler form of that, where you're always doing pull requests into master from feature branches. And should have said this at the beginning, but if you have any questions, feel free to chime in while I'm talking, or if you post them to the chat in the, there should be a chat window somewhere there, so you can post them there if you want to type them instead. Okay, so, you know, why do we want to run tests against feature branches? Why not just merge them into master or development and have the QA team handle it later or get it out into production first? So have any of these things happened to you? Well, you know, another developer or team merges untested code, and then that means that it's blocking your work. So they put some half-baked feature out there, it's got critical bugs, and now you either can't build your project or you can't complete the item you signed up for because you've pulled in their work and now you're kind of stuck with it. So this is one of those things that, you know, I consider just like common decency and being polite and professional is making sure your stuff is tested before you push it off to other teams in your organization. Or maybe you've seen an untested feature is blocking the release. So, you know, team A is working on some big feature A, team B is working on some big feature B. They both put them into the release at the same time. And then now all of a sudden, because team A stuff doesn't work, team B is, they've finished their stuff, but now you can't get the release out the door because there are critical blocking issues. So it creates a lot of release-related challenges as well as work productivity challenges when people are merging code that hasn't been tested. So that's why it's so important to run your tests. But it can also happen if later on in the pipeline, a product owner or a customer sees something in a release candidate environment or a beta environment, and now all of a sudden they want you to yank out that code, like, oh, that feature is not ready to go yet. And they like to wave their hands and make it sound like this is easy. And they say, just take that part out, but leave all the other features in because we still want the release to go out tonight. But this big feature, it's not ready, so just pull it out. And so then everybody scrambles to create a new build. They can make mistakes while doing that. And that's how bad things can happen on release night, and unhappy developers get stuck staying up until 3 in the morning. So that's why it's important to test these things as early as possible and as often as possible. So here's the plan for what we're going to walk through. First, we're going to take a look at writing end-to-end tests in WebdriverIO using the Cucumber plugin. There are a ton of different testing frameworks out there. This one happens to be one of my favorites of the day. but there's nothing that says you have to do it in WebdriverIO. This is just one of the ones I like to show. Then we're going to show how Tugboat can be used to generate test environments automatically for every pull request. They call those previews. And then finally, we're going to show how you can run your WebdriverIO tests in parallel as part of that process, and everything wraps up pretty nicely. So before we dive into the individual pieces of how each part works and how it's implemented, I thought it would be good to show you all kind of what we're trying to get to here. So I'm going to pull up a sample project. And let me just make sure I grab the right one here. I forgot where I put it, sorry. So this is the Tugboat piece of things. And I think this was a GitHub project. I think it's associated with my personal GitHub. So. Okay. So this is our test project in GitHub. This is Tugboat. Pull up Testery as well. Okay, so I'm going to start out by just showing a commit on a branch that kind of kicks this whole thing off. So I'll modify a test to get it to fail on purpose so that you can see that. And we'll just commit and then push our failing test out to, here I have a feature branch called feature test update test. So you might be doing test-driven development locally, writing the test, writing the code, writing the test, writing the code. And then now you think you've got things good, so you want to commit and push them out. So the first thing that's going to happen in this is, if you take a look at our pull requests that we have, there's one called testing Tugboat. And you can see some of the commits we've made here. And then you can see I just made this commit that says failing test. So one of the things that's nice about the fact that the tests are running on every commit like this is you can see the commit history. So I modified one of the tests earlier just to make sure this worked before showing it to you all, and was searching for cow. And if you look, you can see that one of the tests failed because cow didn't have any search results. But then if you come forward to this other one, then we had a passing test run. And then now we've just committed this one that's failing. So the first thing you see down here is that Tugboat has, Tugboat is actually creating the environment here, and then Testery is creating the test run. So if we click through to the Tugboat build, that shows us here we've got what they call a preview. And a preview is actually an environment that's dynamically spun up. So if you click on preview, it will take you to the instance of the environment that we're testing. And so you can see that you know, they generate a URL here, and then it's hosted at Tugboat. And so this entire full stack environment was automatically spun up and is now hosted at this URL for us, just because we created a new pull request. And that'll happen automatically for every pull request, because that's the way the project is configured. And so then the other thing that you see is we end up with a test run that shows up here. And so you can see that the tests are starting to trigger for this commit that we just made. And then everything will be running here. on the testery side, you see the history of your test runs. You have different environments in case you want to run the same test against multiple environments. And then you can configure alerts so that, you know, when a test run completes, I can send a Slack message, or I can get an Ops Genie alert that'll page the developers and wake them up in the middle of the night, whatever you want to do there. So that while that's running, are there any questions about that? That's basically the, I think tonight I'm going to show you all the steps you would have to do to get the same result that we just saw here. So, any questions before we jump in? Nope. Okay, cool. So let's see, back to here. So we're going to start with WebdriverIO, which is the testing framework that we're using. So WebdriverIO is a JavaScript implementation of the Selenium WebDriver API that is implemented to run on Node.js. There are a few different versions. Even for JavaScript, there are a few different versions of WebDriver. This one tends to be my favorite. There are also WebDriver implementations for Java, Python, Ruby, yeah, .NET. So WebDriver is a pretty common framework to be used for web-based testing. And so you may be asking, you know, isn't Selenium dying? So I've heard some bad things about it. Why is this guy recommending that I still use it? So there are other frameworks out there like Cypress. Cypress does have some nice things going for it. It also has some challenges that you have to overcome if you're using it, just based on the way that it runs, the browser support, things like that that are differences. So I would say that Selenium is still very much the most popular, widely supported protocol. And a lot of the concerns folks mentioned about reliability come down to the way that the tests are written, or the way that they're executed. And there are some things that you can do to overcome. Let's see. We have a question of if there is a C++ implementation of WebDriver. I don't know about that one. I haven't heard about it.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. There's .NET, and I think all the .NET stuff has like interoperability, so maybe you could write some stuff in C++ and still call the libraries that are C#. But yeah, I haven't heard of anyone using that. Cool. Okay, so apparently Arch is going to talk about NPM. So the NPM is how we want to install some of these things. So definitely a very useful tool. So if you want to add WebdriverIO to your project, you can follow the Getting Started guide that's out on WebdriverIO, and you do an NPM install and add the CLI dependency. And that'll give you a new command called wdio. And you can do npx wdio config-y, and then that'll install a default config file that should help you get up and running. So after you run that command and then install some of these other dependencies, this is just the set of dependencies that we're going to use for this example. So we've got some extra things in here, like we've added the Cucumber framework, Cucumber Chrome driver, a thing called Chrome driver service. And that's really just what helps WebdriverIO fire up the browser and be able to run tests and all that. Okay, so that's the WebdriverIO piece. So now we get into the Cucumber stuff a bit. And so the first thing we're going to do is create what are called feature files. So In Cucumber, a feature file describes the test scenarios for a feature, and they're written in something called Gherkin. All right, that was my attempt at humor, calling it a pickly way of saying given when then. So really, these files are just a set of statements that say, given some precondition, when I perform an action, then I expect this behavior to happen in my application. And so they typically look something like this. So you have, at the top of the file, you have the name of the feature. Then you have the name of the scenario. So in this case, we're navigating to the preview. And then you have a set of domain steps, which are things like, I should have shown an example with given, but typically they start with given some conditions. When I do these actions, then certain things happen, like the page title is this expected value. So you're probably saying that looks kind of like magic. If that's actually an executable test, there's got to be more to it that tells the system what to do. And that more to it is what goes into your step definitions files. So here we created a folder called steps, and inside there's a JavaScript file called navigation. And we import the Cucumber library. We import one of our pages, which I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. Then we import the Chai library, which is a pretty popular assertions framework for JavaScript. So on the previous page, I showed, there's a step that says when I search for. And so what this is doing here is it's mapping this regular expression for when I search for something to do a call the home page search function. And so that will actually, in the Chrome browser, navigate to the home page and click search. I already mentioned what's at the top of the file. It's important to note that for this particular example, we're using the environment variables to pass in the service URL. So this URL is going to come back to that dynamically generated environment that comes through for Tugboat. And this step is going to navigate to that. And then this is what an assertion looks like using the Chai library. So I probably should have left that where it's highlighted so you can read the whole thing. But if I wanted to say, then there are so many search results, then I say expect actual count to equal, and then it says we found count results for your search. So that's what we're going to assert happens on the web page that we're testing. The next part of this is, we mentioned home page a lot. So this is what a page object looks like. And page object is a common pattern in any of the WebDriver type implementations. And the idea is that you want to take the different selectors that you use to find elements on the page. So if you're familiar with CSS selectors in jQuery, this isn't 100% jQuery, but it's something that in most cases acts like jQuery. It's actually part of the WebdriverIO library, and it can be used to find elements on the page. And then you can define methods on your page. So on the home page of the page we're testing, we can search. And then you can perform actions either interacting with the browser. So here we're executing some arbitrary, well, not arbitrary JavaScript, but we're executing some JavaScript to click on the search toggle. And then here we're taking the search box, and then we're going to put in the search term and press enter. So that's how a page object would be implemented. So that's all you have to do to write the tests. And if you just want to run things locally, those are the only steps that you need to go through. So at this point, you can then run npx wdio, which will run the full set of tests. Or if you want to run just a certain set of tests that are tagged, you can run, sorry, this should be an NPX as well. You run NPX, WDIO, and then passing in these options. So I'll go ahead and show what that looks like locally, in case anybody here hasn't seen Selenium test running before. Chrome should be popping up. I don't see it. Ah, there we go. I think with recording the video, it's slowing things down a bit. Oh, I didn't have my tags on here. So this is how you do tags. You just say like active, and this can be anything you want to tag it with. So I typically like to say active to show what I'm actively working on. So I should see a Chrome window pop up here, and it'll run through kind of quickly, but it's going to load up our page that we're testing, and it's going to go ahead and click the search term. Oh. So our preview that we were using was old. Let me see. So something Tugboat will do is if your environment hasn't been accessed in a while, it puts it to sleep. So just need to visit it to, the fact that we visited it, I think reloads it. So we could probably write our test to be aware of that. But in this particular demo, I didn't have that set up. But there, so it loads our page. You see it clicks search for Tugboat, went by kind of fast. And then our test failed because should say that we expected it to say we found 5 results, but it actually found 6 results. So that's a way that you can do automated tests. But suppose I didn't run that test. You know, interns first day. If I didn't run the tests, I just wrote locally and just pushed it out there. Now, because of how we have things set up, we're going to see that same result happen out in GitHub. So any questions about running it locally? Okay, I've got a question about what pain points Tugboat solves for companies that are using a few dedicated environments, such as Dev and QA. So that's a good question. If you have just a dev environment or a QA environment, what tends to happen, particularly as you get larger teams and with more developers, or when you get to having a separate dev and QA team, if you're going that route, is everybody's kind of fighting over the same environments. So you know, you don't have to have a very large team to already have 6 or 7 different versions of the code out there on different branches, where one person's working on this feature, another person's working on that feature. And so having that environment that is spun up automatically based off of that branch means that now that that branch is out there, you can share that preview with other people. So like I mentioned, the I mentioned that scenario where you know, the product owner for the first time sees the feature they asked you to build when it's already in the release candidate and it's about to go out into production the following week. Well, instead, if you built this preview based on your pull request, before you even merge the code into the line of code that's going to be headed to production, or even your development environment, you can just say, hey, I built this feature. Here's the URL for it. Why don't you come take a look? And they can come out here. They have a full stack environment. They can click around, which is really pretty cool. So if any of you have gone through the steps to build something kind of like this, it's actually a lot of work and takes a significant amount of time to get in place. And so it's really awesome that, you know, with this, you can just wire up your project and it's good to go. So that's why something like this might be nicer than having a static dev or QA environment. Cool. Something else I want to show you about running locally before we show what has to be done to set up Tugboat and Testery is a really cool way to debug WebdriverIO tests locally is using the, I guess people say REPL, REPL. So if I do npx REPL Chrome, it's actually going to fire up a Chrome browser that is connected to WebdriverIO, and then it's going to give me a command line window that can then be used to interact with that browser. So if I leave that open over there, and I leave this open over here, oh, it's actually even running my test. I didn't realize it would do that. So now here, I've got access to the browser object, and I've got access to the ability to search for items. So like say I want to, you know, look for this little menu dude. So I can say inspect over here, and I can see that this menu is called toggle icon. So it's got a class called toggle icon. So then over here, I can use the CSS selector toggle icon. And now I can see immediately that that's the syntax that's going to find that element. So that's exactly what I would put in my test to find that element. And I can even try out things like what happens if I click on it. So if I call the click command here, you can see that it clicked on the toggle. And now it's showing the search query. So a really effective way of just trying out WebdriverIO, interacting with the browser, trying what code you're going to try before you put it into the test. And then the other way that you can do this is you can actually add the browser.debug method to your tests. So if we come into our test project and we go into any of this code, you can put browser debug. And what that'll do is then when the tests are running, it'll pause when it gets to browser debug. If you have, in this case, I'm using an environment variable to only call it if that's set. And so then it'll pause right before that happens. And then the same thing we just showed, you can go in and you can type, you know, to try to interact with things just to test out your selectors and things like that. So when it comes to web testing, one of the things that is most likely to go wrong is, you know, something like this changed where it used to be called intro text and now it's called entrance text or something like that, because somebody was working on the feature. And so using those debugging techniques can be useful for seeing why a test isn't working. Any questions about test writing before we jump into the part about Tugboat and Testery? Nope. Oh, I know. I was going to add a test. So I think we've still got enough time here if you all want to see adding a new test. So this is kind of the, I'm going off script here. We're going to do it live. So I think, let's see. Yeah, like how about we do a test for posting a comment? Does that sound good? Okay, so the first thing I would typically do, right-click inspect. If you're doing any kind of web testing, you always right-click inspect everything. And then you want to look for something that looks like a reliable selector. So I always like to go for class names that look like they have the meaning of the thing that you're looking at. So here, since we want to click, add comments, a thing called the post comment link looks pretty reliable. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a scenario, user post comment. And we're going to add some steps. So we're going to say when I navigate to preview and I post a comment. So pretty straightforward test. So we've modified our feature file to add a new scenario. So now we go over into the step definitions. And so we need to add one of these. So it's a when I post a comment. And then we have the function that gets called when we want it to post a comment. And we're going to keep it clean, and we're going to add this to our home page. So we're going to say home page, let's just call it post comment. And the comment, let's look at what it needs. So it looks like we need a comment, a name, and an email. Actually, comment is optional, so I guess you could just do name and email. But let's do name, email, and comment. So I'm just going to hard code these for now. Let's do comment, and then let's just add math random so that it's different every time. So now we need to create this method on the home page. So if we go over to our home page object, we're going to go ahead and create post comment, and we're going to do name, email, and comment. So name, email, comment. And then now we need to add the objects on the page we're going to interact with. So we had, first we need to click that link that we found up here. So post comment link. So comment link. Post comment. And then after we click that link, then we need to add our comment to a box with an ID of comment. And then it looks like we also have, looks like they call it author in the code, and then email. So we have comment, author, and email. Comment, author, email. And those were IDs, so it's a hashtag. So author, hashtag comment, and hashtag email. And so then now whenever somebody calls post comment, the first thing we want to do is the comment link. We're going to click that. And then we're going to set the comment equal to comment. Oops. This should be set value. Then we're going to set the author to name. And we're going to set the email to email. And then I think we have to, yeah. So now we've got an input button with an ID of submit. So let's go ahead and add our submit. And we need to click that dude. And that's adding a new test. So you think it'll work? I have no idea. So we're going to add our changes, and let's just throw it out there. See if it shows up. So while that's building, and I'm about to jump into the setup for the Tugboat side, are there any questions about the tests? Oh, I misspelled author. Oh wait, where did I do that? On the tag. Oh no. All right, well, we'll get to watch that fail. And then we'll fix it. Cool. All right, so all this Tugboat stuff looks like it must have been hard work to set up, right? So what is Tugboat? They're a cloud-based service that generates an on-demand full-stack preview for each pull request. So I realize the project is called Client-Tugboat. I don't have any kind of relationship with them. So it's not like they're paying me to do this. Just came across their product actually just a few weeks ago and thought it was a really good fit for what we do. So, but the first thing you need to do is go to their site and create a free account. So you can sign up with your GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. And then after that happens, there is a folder you create called .tugboat, and you can put a config YAML out there. They have a few different examples on their site. So like there's one that just hosts a static HTML. So all you got to do is plop HTML in your thing, and then whenever you do a pull request, it'll show up out there. It takes care of, I think they used Nginx or HTTPD or something like that for hosting the website. But basically what goes in this file is you define what your services are. So here they've got, for this demo project, they have a PHP section. You specify a Docker image. So if you're familiar with Docker, that's a popular technology these days where you can build what they call a container, which is basically kind of like an image, although they're much faster to work with than images. And then here you've got different sections where you can initialize, run extra commands to initialize the preview, update things, or run a build. And then here they've also got a database backing it. So that's why I say it's full stack. So they're doing more than just hosting the website. They're potentially hosting your database or any other service layer components that you might have. So we run that. And then the other thing we have to add to our Tugboat config is the ability to kick off the test run. So here, Testery has a CLI. It's actually written in Python. That's a wrapper around our public-facing API. And so you can do a pip install Testery, and you'll get that locally. And then from there, you can create a test run. The token you get from our application, and then you pass in the commit hash, which environment you want it to run against, and which project is configured. This is the command you run to get the latest version. So you can do pip install testery upgrade if you have Python 3.6 or higher. And then after that, this isn't something you would always need to do unless you're using Tugboat here. But to tell Testery what URL to use for the preview, the way we have that implemented in this example is we're going to run this command to create a new environment in Testery, and we're going to pass in the preview URL as the key in the name, and then the URL as a variable, which will then get passed into the tests when they run out in the Testery platform. And that's it for Tugboat. So the full file shows up here. It's in the same project as our test that we just implemented. So we have the .tugboat config file, and this is pretty much their out of the box example that I just copied, except for this section that I added to install the Testery command line interface, update the environment, and kick off a test run. Other than that, this is just their out of the box example. And you know, depending on how much work your image does, your services layer might look almost just like this, where you're just defining a service and calling your container, and having your container do most of the work. So that's the Tugboat config in its entirety. And that's really all you do. There's a couple of settings in here when you set up the project that you know, you can let's see, at the project level repository settings, you can just decide like, hey, I don't really want it to build every pull request, or you know, I want it to set the statuses, things like that. So those are the settings. But really, if you were to start with a vanilla project and paste in the sample config, and then just add those couple of lines to create a test run, that's all you would need to do to do what we just saw. Then on the Testery side, so what is Testery? Testery is a cloud-based continuous testing platform that integrates with GitHub the way that we just saw. We also integrate with Bitbucket, and that lets you run your tests for every pull request. I didn't mention the parallelization. So, you know, we have different plans where you can scale up to running significant numbers concurrently. We've even, for some folks, done hundreds of concurrent. We have one customer that runs over 250,000 test executions a month on our platform. So definitely can scale out to whatever you need. But on the free plan, even, you know, we have a free plan you can sign up for today where you can just run, like, I think we do 5 at a time on that. So it's still going to be faster than running it locally, even on the free plan. So you create the account, you set up a project and associate it with the project containing your tests, and then the section I already showed of configuring Tugboat to run the tests. So if you all want to go to testery.io/signup, plan equals free. If you want the free one, you can just go ahead and do that. And then the only thing I think you need for what we did today is to select the testing framework, WebdriverIO. So, you know, I mentioned there are a lot of frameworks out there. We've got SpecFlow, Cypress, Nightwatch, WebdriverIO. Am I missing any? I don't know if I'm missing any. So for this particular example, you need WebdriverIO. And really, that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share, or stop the recording if you all want to ask questions.